Start off today with a question, and I'm going to ask you to raise your hand to answer the question. Do know that if you do not raise your hand, there will be absolutely no offense taken by me or anyone else, because this question was not in the text of the sermon as I prepared it this morning. I had an enlightening, I had an awakening during the prelude at the 8:30 service that this question came from. I would like to know if in the last 10 days, last 12 days now, if you watched or read anything about the General Conference of the United Methodist Church, would you please raise your hand? Boy, you're a whole lot better than the first service. The first service, there were 2 people, and I was one of them. And what happened to me was I had this realization that I had said I was going to make the sermon a meditation today on things that happened at General Conference, because as United Methodists, I thought it was important that we know what our church did, or didn't, or didn't, or didn't. Point of order. Parliamentary inquiry. Question. I'm just really glad that I don't have a screen here that you can put point of order or a question or parliamentary inquiry. I watched one session of General Conference where they had 1 hour to do business. And for the first 35 minutes, the bishop kept saying, I see a point of order on microphone 3. And I watched several days this week. I watched, a couple of hours each day. And it was the same 10 people. It was the same 10 people who either fell in love with the fact that they had a microphone that they could speak into, or I really don't know why, but it was the same 10 people. Point of order. Parliamentary inquiry. They didn't do much on those days. And as a United Methodist pastor, what I began to realize is that for the vast majority of United Methodists, while they knew General Conference was meeting, that which speaks for the entire church, that which writes the discipline, that which passes resolution that are official on behalf of the United Methodist Church, that the vast majority of United Methodists had life to do. And they were taking care of their jobs, and they were taking care of their families. And they really weren't hanging on every word or every action that came out of Portland, Oregon for the last 12 days. I had that realization this morning during the prelude. And I don't know if you've ever had to get up to speak before a congregation or a group of people and then realize right before you did it that for a whole lot of the people, they're not going to have any idea what I'm talking about. Or for that matter, for some of them, care. So here I am this morning with a pastoral reflection on General Conference. I hope it will be worthwhile for you. I pray it will have a message from God in it. And that's the important thing, that it have a message from God in it. Because I can tell you in a summary way what happened at General Conference. They did a lot of celebrating. They celebrated how the church, I saw a statistic yesterday. The church, the United Methodist Church in Africa, has grown 236%. It has almost tripled in the last 20 years. That's a celebration. That's a celebration that the indigenous church, they celebrated things that were being done on behalf of you and I across the world. people being fed, people being made healthy as they celebrated the No More Malaria campaign, which is being greatly successful. You and I are a part of that. They had the Africa University Choir there, and they celebrated Africa University and the education of a school that was founded by the United Methodist Church. They celebrated all kinds of wonderful things every day. Things that you and I can be proud of. Things that are done in our name, but most of all in Christ's name. And then we made the news for dealing with the issues of human sexuality. Whether to ordain homosexuals, whether to not ordain homosexuals, whether pastors in the United Methodist Church can do same-sex marriage, whether they can't do same-sex marriage. This discussion got so serious that at one point there was even discussion about there being schism within the church, that this might be one of the things that divide the church, and that we would have a conservative United Methodist Church and a liberal United Methodist Church and a centrist United Methodist Church. And they were really talking about that. But when push came to shove, we decided that we would address it in the most United Methodist way possible. We would name a commission to study it for 2 to 3 years, and then come back with a recommendation to a special called meeting of the General Conference. You can't be more United Methodist than that, unless you add a potluck. Now, it is serious what they're doing, okay? Do understand that I know the seriousness of it, because for the very first time in my career, they were legitimately talking about an issue that could divide the church, that literally could make it so that where there used to be one denomination, there will be 2 or maybe even 3. But the friends of mine who I read coming out of General Conference, read what they posted, what they were writing was, they really do have hope. They have hope that when all of the sides involved get together, that we will find a way to be together as a United Methodist Church. But then the first hymn struck me this morning. Leah, I know that you get led to pick the hymns by a power greater than us. The third verse absolutely struck me. Though with a scornful wonder we see her sore oppressed, by schisms rent asunder, by heresies distressed. That just jumped off the page at me today, and I thought, golly, that could have been written about us this week. That poem was written in 1866. We're not going through anything new. We're just going through what's new now. They had issues in 1866 that was dividing the church. And to tell you the truth, and my wife says I shouldn't say that, because by saying to tell you the truth, it's implying that I didn't tell you the truth on other things. And she's right. And as soon as I do it, I think, no, I shouldn't have said that. But to tell you the truth, the thing that struck me was I got to listen to several of the sermons at General Conference, because about 11:15 a.m. every morning, I could turn on the live stream and hear the bishop who was assigned as the preacher for the day. And there was some great preaching. One of the bishops from Africa was talking about, and this has nothing to do other than the fact it's great sermon illustration, that there were a man that was transporting poisonous snakes on a plane. I know, don't go to that movie. Poisonous snakes on a plane, and all of a sudden they got loose. And they started biting people, and people started getting sick, and some even dying. And the pilot radioed the airport and said, "I need to land immediately." And the guy, the person on the other end, the air traffic controller said, "No, don't land, go higher." And he says, "You don't understand, I've got snakes loose on the plane." And he says, "No, don't land, go higher." And he said, "But you don't understand." He says, "Do what I'm telling you to do. Go higher." And as he went to the highest elevation he possibly could, what he found out was the snakes could not operate at that higher elevation, and they became docile, and they stopped moving, and they were able then to pick them up and put them back in their containers and keep the people safe. And the bishop from Africa said, "There are snakes that are trying to kill the church. We need not go where the snakes are strong. We need to go where God is. We need to go higher. We need to go to remember that God is the one who saves us, and God is the one who empowers us." And as I listened to Bishop Mumbasu, I think was his name, I got to thinking, my goodness, what a great word for us. That we won't solve our problems by getting down in the mud. We will solve our problems by kneeling at the throne of grace. We have to go higher. And then on the last morning, Friday morning, I heard Bishop Stanowski. She was brilliant. She talked about the difference between being a church that was stuck in the grave or a church that was living in the light. And she used this passage. Let me give it to you real quick. While they were going, this is the resurrection passage from Matthew. While they were going, some of the guard went into the city and told the chief priests everything that had happened. After the priests had assembled with the elders, they devised a plan to give a large sum of money to the soldiers, telling them, "You must say his disciples came by night and stole him away while we were asleep. If this comes to the governor's ears, we will satisfy him and keep you out of trouble." So they took the money and did as they were directed, and the story is told even to this day. Bishop pointed out that whenever we deal with stuff that's hard, especially if we think we might be out of control, that what we want to do is what the Pharisees and the chief priests did. We want to keep Jesus dead. They wanted to make sure that if somebody asked, that the guard said, "Oh no, he's dead. They just stole his body." They want to keep control of the situation. They wanted to make sure that if the governor heard, there was an answer. And if somebody else asked a question, there was an answer. And they wanted to make sure that the answer was, Jesus is dead. But living on the outside of the tomb, living on the outside of the stone that was rolled away, the proclamation was, Christ is risen, not Jesus is dead. And I began, and what she did was she pointed out how sometimes you and I, and this is about anything, it can be in the church, it can be outside of the church, if you and I are not comfortable with wrestling with something, it's easier for us to try and keep it dead in the tomb, away from us, rather than seeing new things. I talked to you about women's ordination. We have ordained women in the United Methodist Church. Do you know how long we've had ordained women in the United Methodist Church? 60 years. That was one of the celebrations at General Conference, that we ordained women in the United Methodist Church. And we started 60 years ago. Yippee-yi-yo-ki-yay for us who are so progressive. 60 years ago? But there were those. There were those when women were seeking ordination, which they should have had, who wanted to make sure that that issue stayed dead, tied up. Only men could be clergy. Hadn't been that long ago, folks. Been inside my lifetime. Inside my lifetime. We are now entering into, and this is kind of where I wanted to take you. In my listening to the preaching, to the actions that were taken this week, one thing became really clear to me, and it was summarized in one of the things I heard Bishop Stanofsky say. The church is of God. The church is not God. God is doing wonderful things in the church, but God is not limited to what the church is doing. So I want to make sure that in my leadership as a pastor and in my faith as a disciple, that I focus more on Jesus and less on structures. More on love and less on hatred. More on grace and less on judgment. More on saying welcome. You are welcome in this place. And less in trying to figure out who's not. More focusing on prayer rather than politics. More focusing on being open to the movement of the Spirit rather than trying to determine what the movement of the Spirit is. More on supporting and caring for each other, even if we disagree. It is generally my policy not to use my wife as an illustration. I quit doing that a long time ago, but I did use this. And she does not know I did this, so this will be, I will pay for this. In our younger days, we would argue about something, have a strong conversation about something, and she would say, "You don't understand." And I would say, "I understand completely. I don't agree." Now, I didn't love her any less, whether we agreed or not. There is nothing that could happen that will break our love for each other and my love for her. Oh, and by the way, dear, since we won't be here next week, happy birthday next Sunday. But I will tell you, in our life together, we have loved each other deeply, but we have deeply disagreed on things. She would say at annual conference, often we would cancel each other out because they'd take a vote and she'd stand for yes and I'd stand for no. And when the next vote came, I'd stand for yes and she'd stand for no. It is possible to disagree and still love each other. That needs to happen in the church as well, because what happened, and this is what saddened us about General Conference, people were saying bad things about each other. They were saying things that were not appropriate for a Christian gathering. We're better than that. Christ is better than that. Oh, I don't know what the future's going to hold. I don't know what the special commission's going to come up with. I don't know if there'll be a United Methodist Church as we know it in 4 or 5 or 8 more years. I do know that the people who left there left with a commitment to find Christ and to do what Christ is leading us to do. And that's what I would tell you this day. I want to find Christ in this place and do what Christ is leading us to do. Amen.